Hello, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Mr. Krauss.
Good
First,
evening.
I thank Mr. Krauss for accepting my invitation, and I'm so glad to talk to him today. Ladies and gentlemen, I know that I guess everybody know Mr. Krause, and at least some of you have watched some of his debates or read one of his books. Mr. Krause has a he's popular in our Arab countries and Western countries. Mr. Krause or Mr. Lawrence Maxwell Krause, he is an American Canadian theoretical physicist and cosmologist. Mr. Krauss was a professor in Arizona State University, Yale University, and Case Western Reserve University. Mr. Krauss has founded the ASU Interplanetary Initiative to find answers about a lot of fundamental questions concerning the universe and to take the next steps toward the future of space exploration.
Actually,
Mr.
okay,
Yeah.
let me just correctly briefly. I actually have nothing to do with the Interplanetary Initiative at ASU. I founded the Origins Project to explore fundamental questions, and
Okay.
I've moved it. It's become an independent foundation. Just so you know, sometimes people connect me to the Interplanetary Initiative, but I have nothing to do with it. Sorry, go on.
Uh, no,
Hmm.
thank you, Mr. Krauss.
Okay.
Mr. Krauss is the author of several best-selling books, including The Physics of Star Trek in 1995 and A Universe from Nothing in 2012. Mr. Krauss, welcome and thank you again for accepting this invitation. It's an honor to me to speak to you today.
Oh, it's an honor for me to speak to you today too. It's a pleasure to be with you, and and I'm happy to talk to you. I just realized as you were talking that I wrote the physics of Star Trek, which you referred to before you were born. I think so. So
Yeah.
that makes me feel older than I might otherwise. But anyway, let's
Yeah,
go.
before I was born with the 1 year because I
Yeah,
was born in 1996.
I must have been anticipating your birth when I wrote
Yes.
it.
Okay, Mr. Krauss, the first question that I'm going to ask is uh, tell us about your how did Lawrence Krauss has grow up? I mean, did you was you a Christian boy?
Oh,
Was you a boy who went to church every Sunday? Go to yeah, I mean, to the church and saying that he made some guilt or
I'm just going to close
what?
the door so my dog doesn't bark too much. Hold on.
Okay.
There we go. My dog usually likes to be part of the broadcast. Um, I know I didn't grow up in a very religious household, but it was not a Christian household. It was a Jewish household, um,
Hmm.
and um, and I did the kind of I was kind of like many Jews, kind of a secular Jew in the sense that my family did periodically go to synagogue for what they call the high holidays, but mostly it was for cultural reasons. And but I read voraciously. We talked about the fact that you love to read, and I'm very impressed with how much you read. Um, but have always loved to read too, and I read everything. I read the Bible and the Quran, and all of that when I was younger to try and understand some of those things. And I think like many young people, I kind of wanted to believe those stories, but I grew up and I eventually outgrew those stories. And it wasn't an epiphany or anything. I just found that them like fairy tales, like Santa Claus. Eventually, even though as much as I might like to believe them, it was clear to me that they probably didn't reflect reality, the supernatural things that were going on, and I outgrew religion. So, but it wasn't a huge deal in my family, as I say. But I did go to synagogue and such when I was younger, and I actually visited other things. I visited churches too. In any case, I wasn't ingrained, but I was told the stories. But I think like many young people, as they grow up, unless somehow someone continues to reinforce those stories, the stories begin to look pretty silly. And they certainly did to me, and they still do.
Yeah, Mr. Krauss, an international research team has found chemical signs that indicates to the possibility of having a life on Venus. And that was the first time that scientists could find these marks, after it was just an expectations. Those results were published in Nature Astronomy, and it was announced by the European Science Observatory in 14 September. Actually, Mr. Krauss, we want from you an explanation, a simple one, about this discovery, an explanation that could anyone understand it easily.
Well, that's a challenge. Look, the interesting thing is that we've begun to realize, first of all, just by understanding life on Earth, that living things life can exist in far greater regions and far greater variation of conditions than we had once thought. We used to think that life could only exist below the boiling point or not in acids, and we've discovered what are called extremophiles here on Earth that can live deep underground or in acidic environments or in boiling water. So we've learned that life is much more robust than we imagined. That's very important for trying to think about microbial life that might exist in the solar system. But then we've also begun to realize that there are places in the solar system that might be hospitable to life that we never would have thought before. For a long time, people thought of maybe Mars as the prime candidate. But then people began to realize that other systems like Europa and Io, the moons of various planets like Jupiter and Saturn, have are ice oceans, but ice worlds, but they have deep oceans underneath that are heated by, it turns out, by friction, by what it's called gravitational tidal forces that heat up those systems. And so they may have deep oceans, and they may be prime places to look for life. For a long time, although it hasn't been popular, people have talked about Venus, which is kind of amazing because Venus is a hellish environment. On the ground, it's hot, the surface of Venus is hotter than and hot enough to melt lead. It's hotter than Morocco in the summer, and it's therefore you might think the last place you'd look for life. But what's interesting is that that's the surface of Venus. But Venus is covered by a cloud, a deep and thick cloud layer, and there are layers of the clouds which have basically the density more or less of water, and also temperatures that are not absurd. And so it's realized that potentially in those dense clouds, organic materials might be able to actually literally float and be in an environment that might not be inhospitable. And what the recent observation is a phosphine is of an organic, basically one of a material that is known to have been created by biological systems here on Earth, and there generically aren't other easy mechanisms to create that organic molecule other than biology. Now that doesn't prove it because there are ways to create it other than biology, but the observation of phosphine apparently in these cloud regions of Venus suggests that it's worth exploring further to see if there might be a biological imprint, if that might be a biological imprint. By no means is it proof, but it suggests once again that life could be much more ubiquitous than we imagine, not just throughout the universe, but even in our solar system. Now, the other thing you'd have to prove is that it's an independent genesis of life. That, because material gets transferred between planets by comets and asteroids and they knock rocks out of Mars. We find Martian meteorites on Earth. Which means material gets ejected from Mars to Earth, and microbes could survive the voyage between planets. So if we discover life elsewhere in our solar system, we'll next need to see if that life is similar to life on Earth, and we'll have to decide if it's pollution or if it's an independent genesis. But it's a very exciting time right now. It's very exciting to realize that we are on the cusp of potentially finding evidence of at least microbial life as close to home as Venus or Europa or maybe even Mars.
Yeah, Mr. Krauss, recently in our Arab countries, we have some YouTubers who are trying to simplify science theories to help people understand this universe. And
It's
but
good.
these yeah but we find other people that say that the qualities of videos is useless, and who watch these videos just enjoying and don't take the responsibility to look into the sources, or to read the resources, and he forgets all those information. Mr. Krauss, do you see that this kind of videos is useful or the opposite?
Well, anytime we try and help people understand the universe around them, it's useful. And science, for better or worse, is the only way to understand the universe around us, because science is based on empirical study, testing, retesting, rational thinking, testing again, and it's worked. It's allowed the civilization we now live in. It's allowed me to talk to you right now across the world. Science, what makes science so important is that it works. It is the proper way to understand the universe, and it's helped us develop technologies that affect our own condition, and in many ways have helped people and sometimes have hurt them, but have been allowed the modern world of 7 billion people to at least many of them be able to eat and clothe themselves, and but also it's produced some of the most exciting ideas. Some of the most important intellectual discoveries that humans have made are scientific ones. And learning about the universe is one of the most beautiful things that people can experience. It's part of the amazing aspect of being alive. The diversity of experience and phenomena in the universe is amazing. So we need more science on YouTube and not less.
Yeah. Mr. Krauss, what is the first questions that lead you to this field, to study science?
Okay. Well, I mean, I got interested in science for a variety of reasons, partly because of reading. I read books by scientists and about scientists when I was younger. I remember I read a book about Galileo when I was very young, and
Wow.
it really inspired me because I found him a courageous defender of truth in the in the face of religious suppression, for example. But then books by people like Richard Feynman and Albert Einstein and George Gamow and Isaac Asimov got me excited about science, and that's one of the reasons why I returned the favor by writing books myself to inspire young people to get interested in science. So I think it was the example of those scientists that largely got me interested in science, and also parochial things. My mother wanted me to be a doctor, and so she convinced me doctors were scientists, and I got interested in science, and then eventually I realized that not all doctors were scientists, but by then it was too late. I was hooked on science. And so I think that, and you know, and the excitement of ideas at the forefront, the excitement of potentially being the first person in the world to understand something, to discover things, that excitement of discovery also captured my imagination as well. I have to say I still do. I enjoy all aspects of the human intellectual experience. So I read widely in history and literature and beyond science, and I still do. I think all aspects of science is a part of our culture, and it changes our perspective of our place in the universe. But so does good literature and art and music, and so I'm a fan of all of those things. But I find personally the privilege of being part of a group of people who continue to push the forefronts of understanding of our universe to be such a privilege that I've enjoyed it, and I've been fortunate in my life to be a part of it.
Yeah, Mr. Krauss, you mentioned Richard Feynman.
Yeah.
He's the scientist that you were attached to, and you still, we can say that he's your role model, for
Well, I have a lot
example.
of. Well, I have a number of role models. Yes, he was a role model in his intellectual courage, his humor, his childish excitement, and the way he lectured and the way he related science affected the way I think I lecture and the way I teach. But I've been fortunate to have many role models. Many of the people I've worked with, Nobel
Yeah, but
scientists like Stephen Weinberg and Sheldon Glasgow and others, and even many of my students have taught me to understand the world in a better way. Sorry, go on.
yeah, but Mr. Krauss, you wrote a book, an entire book about Richard Feynman. So
I
that's
did.
huge.
Well,
Yeah,
I did. I did.
what's so
I did.
special? What's so special
Well,
with
he's one of the most remarkable
Richard?
scientists of the. Well, he was one of the most remarkable scientists of the 20th century. But
Yeah.
it's more than that. He became a public figure because of writing about him, because he was such an interesting personality. And I guess one of the reasons I wrote my book is that people were fascinated by the personality that was Richard Feynman. But what made Richard Feynman worth learning about was not just that he was a colorful character, but was the work he did in science. And there wasn't really any books about his science. So I wrote a scientific biography that merged together his science with his life. And I was asked to do it, and it was a privilege, of course, because he was a scientific hero of mine. And I have to say, it's the only book I've ever written that's never got any negative reviews. So I'm very happy about that.
Yeah, me too. Mr. Krauss, most of time in America, Western countries, we see debates that are calm, and the debaters are respecting each other. Sometimes there's some humor in it,
I'm glad you
as
think that
I
happens.
see.
I don't think it happens enough. I think right now debates are becoming, especially political debates in the United States, are much more vicious, without humor and without respect. But anyway, go on. I agree that debates should have humor and respect.
Yeah. If we compare these debates with the debates that happen in Arab countries, there are like huge difference between them. The debates in Arab countries, unfortunately, we see yelling, we see like cursing, we see they don't respect each other opinion, and a lot of things. What for you, or in your opinion, what lead the Arab countries or the debaters in Arab countries don't respect the point of view of each other, or don't respect each other, or don't respect the subjects that they talk about it in the
Well,
debate?
well, of course, I can't speak directly because I haven't watched debates in Arab countries. And I'll take it on faith, if you wish, of what you said. But I think what
Yeah.
happens is what inevitably causes these kind of emotional arguments is really adherence to dogma. When people abandon rationality and adhere to dogmas, either religious or ideological dogmas, that are based on emotion and the appeal to emotion more than intelligence, that feeds that kind of emotional debate and lack of respect. The problem, if you know the answer before you even ask the question, how can you possibly ask questions of someone else and respect their answers? Religion and ideology are based on claiming to know the answer before you ask the question, whereas science is the exact opposite. We don't claim to know the answers. We claim to learn the answers by questioning. And so I think if people ask each other questions more, and we're interested in learning rather than claiming to know things in advance, then the debates would be more respectful. I think dogma and ideology are the enemy of truth and knowledge.
You had a debate 6 years ago with a Muslim called Hamza. How was that experience for you?
Well, by the way, a little bit earlier, I'd had a lovely debate with another Islamic scientist not scientist, another Islamic scholar in Australia, some of which is shown in the movie The Unbelievers that was made about me and Richard Feynman. It was maybe more respectful in some ways. The debate in London was very emotionally charged in some ways. It began, of course, with a problem that the organization that organized the debate was very gracious to me in inviting me, and they treated me very well. Let me say that. But publicly, the problem that happened was they promised me, for example, that the audience wouldn't be segregated. And then when I came in, it was segregated. Women weren't allowed to sit with men, and we had to arrange that, and that caused immediately a certain tension. Then the debater himself was very much like a Christian debater that I've debated, named William Lane Craig, someone who relies on clever usage of language to obfuscate that you won't understand that word, but to obstruct clear understanding of ideas, and using those techniques of language, was trying to argue things that I think weren't the case, and I spoke up as honestly and forcefully as I could. It was very difficult because the audience was not. In general, the audience wasn't supportive. There were some people in the audience who were supportive. I argued against dogma in Islam. I treated Islam like any other religion. I still do. I don't think it's necessarily better or worse. I think it's based on the same fallacies and ancient misperceptions of reality that get in the way of a healthy understanding of ourselves and the universe around us. And I think but it was a very difficult debate. Let me put it that way. And I argued, I still don't like the fact that, I was surrounded. There were a lot of women in the audience who were upset to be sitting near men, or were wearing burqas and full burqas, and felt, I think, threatened because I argued that they should be freer to experience the world around them than they were. And some of them argued that how dare did I, argue against that. And the point is, they came into a university, which is a secular environment in a secular country. If they didn't want to be seated next to men, they could have easily waited to watch the discussion at home. But yeah. I think the problem is if you're willing to open yourself up to society, you have to be willing to open up yourself to different viewpoints and different experiences, and you can't expect everyone to respect the viewpoints you have and the lifestyle that you have. And regarding debates, I think I said it there, but I certainly mean it. I think it's important to respect people, but it's not important to respect ideas. Not all ideas are worthy of respect, and I'm happy to argue that they're not. But I hope that I can try and treat people with respect. And if I sometimes get frustrated, I suppose I'm human like everyone else.
Mr. Krauss, do you think that people must believe in God or in a superior power? Because if they don't believe, they will feel like they are lost, and they don't have something to rely to. Or do you think that not believing is good, or believing is something which is not principle, and we can live without God and without any religion?
Well, look, I think that people don't have to. Certainly, people don't have to believe in God to be good people. But I think one of the problems with religion, is its usurped morality. All religions, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, to some extent, exist by convincing people that unless they believe in their particular deity, in their particular prophets, that somehow those people are bad people. And I've met so many people in the United States, for example, who feel that they're bad people for simply questioning the existence of God. But everything should be subject to question. Nothing should be sacred. Every idea should be open to question. And the big problem is when people are told that just by questioning they're bad people. That's harmful. And those people feel like bad people, or are afraid to think. And so that, in my mind, is the worst aspect of many religions. It is clear that you can be a good person, that the belief in God doesn't make you a good or bad person necessarily. It doesn't make you a bad person to believe in God either. You can do good and bad regardless of your beliefs in a deity. And I think that we should realize that the dogma of religion, the sacred books are books written by human beings, and that we do best in treating others and creating a society in which others are treated with respect, not by demeaning those who are different, or castigating those who believe things that are different than you, but rather having open discussions about that. And it's so sad for me to see that people who are called blasphemers in certain countries are sometimes subject to death penalties just for asking questions. How insecure a God are you willing to believe in? If you were a divine being, would you require everyone 5 times a day to tell you how much they loved you?
Yeah.
Do you, if you're a mother or father, do you require your children to tell you they love you 5 times a day, and if they don't, do you punish them? These kind of things I find very telling, and I think that I don't think religion necessarily is intrinsically bad. I do think, however, believing things that are nonsense, believing in fairy tales, is generally bad because it causes you to the beliefs aren't bad, but the beliefs impact on actions, and those actions can sometimes be irrational.
Mr. Krauss, believers like Muslims, they say that the source of morals is religion, is Islam. And if you weren't a Muslim, you won't have any morals. For you,
Well, look,
yeah,
I asked that question. Actually, I asked that question in the Islamic debate in Australia, and I asked you that question. I asked people, if you didn't believe in God, would you suddenly go out to murder your neighbor or
yeah, that's
rob
the point.
a poor person? I think most people would say no, because
Yeah,
we already have an intrinsic kind of morality based on a social contract that the philosopher Rousseau talked about, when we said we're born free, but we live forever in chains. We all realize that if we go out and murder our neighbors and stole from them, and that society would be impossible to live in. I think religion, in fact, was established early on in early primitive societies as a way of establishing some kind of legal order, some kind of way to ensure a peaceful environment for nomadic tribes. And so I understand the origins of religion in the wish, in the hopefulness of having a peaceful society. But I think we've gone beyond that, and I just don't think most people need religion. And the examples of that are clear. There are people look, I believe. I don't like you to use the word belief, but for me, empirical evidence is everything. And I have great deal of evidence of good people who aren't religious. And if you can be a good person and not religious, that proves to me that you don't need to be religious to be a good person. It's a proof. It's an empirical proof, and empirical proofs are the only kind of proofs that matter.
Mr. Krauss, you said in the same debate with the Hamza that criticizing thought lead us to the progress. Do you still believe in the same idea?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
every idea should be subject to questioning. Otherwise, how can we improve it? If we just accept certain things without, if we accept certain ideas without questioning them, then bad ideas can rise to the fore. For example, take Aristotle. I don't want to make this totally charged and just condemn Islam. So let's take Aristotle, a famous thinker in the ancient world. He argued that women have a different number of teeth than men. Well, if people just accepted that idea, then in fact it was ridiculous. The way to resolve it is to say, let's go check and open your mouth and count the number of teeth, and we'll see that your mouth has the same number of teeth that my mouth is. And so we, in order to improve the human condition, we need to constantly question ourselves as well as others. Question our naive beliefs about what's right and wrong, because maybe they're not right. Maybe they're wrong. Take arguments that a lot of religions have against homosexuality, for example.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out in the animal kingdom, almost universally, 10% of sheep, for example, have long-term homosexual relationships. That's not immoral, it's just biology. And so if biology enforces certain things, then how can we say that it's against nature? And so we have to ask these questions by looking at nature and exploring, and we may find that some of our ideas are wrong, but that's okay. That's called learning, and learning is a good thing.
Unfortunately, Mr. Krauss, Muslim countries or Arab countries or countries who speaks Arabic, still think that homosexuality is a disease, is a mental disease.
Yeah, but they do because they don't allow the open discussion. That's the
Yeah.
problem. If there was open discussion and people could see the science and the doctors and also if people were free to get to know people who were homosexual, they wouldn't have that fear and that misunderstanding. In the United States, the reason that gay marriage eventually became legal was not because it was enforced or not even because old people enforced it. What happened is young people like my daughter and other people got to know people who were gay and discovered that they were no different, that they weren't immoral, they weren't bad people. They just happened to love someone of their own sex, and they also learned about the science behind it, and the fact that young people overcame that fear meant that it was inevitable that society would overcome that fear. So I think once again, when you shelter people from knowledge, when you say you can't even learn about this because it's so bad, then you invite, unfortunately, a repressive situation where people cannot learn to question their own ideas.
Mr. Crofts, do you think that religion is causing not having a critical thinking? Do we have a relationship between religion and not having a critical thinking?
I think in general, yes, but not always. I mean, there's some groups like the Jesuits in the Catholic Church that claim to be interested in questioning and education and knowledge. And so I think it's unfair to stereotype religion as always being negative. Sometimes, after all, universities, at least in the West, and I suspect also in the Islamic world, universities grew out of religious environments. So the study of ideas actually did originally develop in religious environments. It outgrew those religious environments. But I think generally we find that, you see, anything that's sacred, the word sacred means that it's not subject to question in some sense, that it's a truth that is so deep that it's heretical to question it. And saying something is sacred, in my mind, is worrisome because that automatically stops questioning. And as I told you, I think questioning is good. I think questioning is not immoral in any way.
Mr. Krauss, how can we change the thought of believers to accept gays, to accept lesbians, to accept someone who is different from him or from her?
Well, first off, I think education. I often say I'm an educator, and therefore there's an old saying in English that if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I'm an educator, so I naturally believe in education. But I think if you educate people and open their eyes to the world around them, they'll be more open to new ideas and new people. And I think so that's part of it, is to encourage people to learn about the world and not shield them from the world. Instead of, and again, this may offend people, but instead of having madrasas where people just learn how to memorize sacred books, if they learn about the world around them and learn the great literature and the great science, it'll open their ideas. But also, if you legitimize differences, if you don't make people who are different evil in your society, if you allow them to openly discuss their views, then people will come into contact with people. I suspect that in many Islamic societies, people know people who are gay, but don't even know they're gay because those people are too afraid to say they're gay. And once you come to know people and realize that they're good people, they're kind people, they're friendly people, they're people you can love, independent of the differences, then the world becomes a better place. And so I think that's by educating people, you naturally open them up to new ideas. I can't hear you anymore. Your sound is.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, no worries.
Unfortunately, Mr. Krauss, we find people in, for example, Morocco, because it's my country, who are educated, has a lot of diploma and all these stuffs, but they don't accept someone who is different. They don't accept it. For example, they say that gay, lesbian, or a non-Muslim is going to burn in hell, going to burn in hell. I don't have another way. He's just gonna burn in hell.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, that's
and he wants this to happen. He wants it so bad.
yeah, yeah. No, it's amazing how much people seem to rejoice. One of the awful things about the false notion of hell that is true in Christianity as well as Islam is that somehow part of the torture is the fact
Yeah.
is the fact that people in heaven can somehow watch that torture and enjoy it. How disgusting is that? Now, I think when you talk about educated people, the point is people are people. Having a diploma doesn't suddenly make you a great person or even an open-minded person. It means you have a diploma. Scientists are human beings, and we're all subject to irrational notions, and we're also to the notions that we are brought up with. That's part of the problem I have with it, instilling religion in children, is it's very hard for them to overcome it because you don't instill it on the basis of knowledge. You do it on a basis of emotion. It's very hard for people to outgrow that. So saying that someone's educated, it doesn't necessarily imply that they're open-minded. It means that they've read books, but maybe they didn't internalize it. And so it's unfortunate. You should never accept people just on the basis of their credentials, but rather on the quality of what they say. Listen to what they talk about. Ask yourself questions. Be skeptical. Ask yourself, does that sound reasonable? And can I then check it with other sources? So, and that's true for listening to me too. Don't just accept me because I have lots of credentials, but listen to what I have to say. Decide if it seems reasonable. If it's not reasonable, decide if maybe you can look up a reference that decides where I might be wrong or maybe where I might be right. That's the basis of human discourse that can make civilization better.
Mr. Krauss, I'm going to ask you about the free will. Do you think that we have a free will, or it's the opposite?
Well, I think at a basic level, there's no such thing as free will. I think the world, laws are determined by the laws of physics. Ultimately, are deterministic. Even though quantum mechanics adds a certain subtlety to that. But I think even though at a basic level free will doesn't exist, namely there are lots of factors and causes that determine what I'm going to say. For all intents and purposes, the world appears to be a world in which we have free will. It is essentially indistinguishable on a human level from a world in which there's free will, and therefore we have to take responsibility for our actions. Even though at some level they may be determined by many causes that we can control, we're thinking beings and we need to take responsibility for our actions. So I think we have to sort of effectively act as if we live in a world that has free will, even though understanding at some basic level that it's not there. But that means that certain differences. That means instead of punishment or retribution so much, we should have understanding and try and have education. So we can realize there are many factors that cause people to do harm to others, including their upbringing, whether it's religious or otherwise, including their social circumstances. And instead of, we may need to remove them from society if they're dangerous. But more important than punishing them should be an effort to try and aid them, to educate them, to help try and overcome whatever those situations were that created the problem in the first place. We may not be able to do that, and we may be required to keep them isolated from society if they're psychopaths or sociopaths. But we should at least, it means that our efforts to isolate them should be based more on rehabilitation than punishment.
Mr. Krauss, how you imagine the end of this universe, the future, for example?
Well, I've written a lot about it. The future is going to be miserable.
Why is that?
The future is going to end badly, but don't worry about it because it's a long time from now.
Okay, so I'm going to be dead.
Yeah, we all are. And the universe is going to go, looks like it's going to keep expanding faster and faster and becoming cold, dark, and empty. And the sun is going to eat up the earth in 5 billion years when the sun becomes a red giant. And and life will end, and the universe will become cold, dark, and empty, and that's the future. But it's a long time from now. It's billions and billions or trillions of years in the future. But what it does mean is that, isn't it fortunate that we're alive right now? That we're living in this brief cosmic instant where the sun is giving us energy, and we've evolved as human beings to be able to think and appreciate the world around us and have this conversation. Life is precious. And we should realize that life is precious, and we should make the most of every moment we have under the sun, not just as a species, but as individuals. We're alive for a relatively brief time. Take advantage and learn the most you can about the world. Experience it. Experience what it means to be human, all aspects of our culture and understanding. And forget the fact that, well, one day you'll be dead, and that one day we'll all be dead. That's life is more important, and enjoying and experiencing life is what's most important.
So the future is scary. I'm not going to think about it. I'm just
Well,
going
no,
to
look,
live.
don't be, no, oh, no, 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 no. It's not a problem. It's okay to think about things that are scary. To recognize, it's worth recognizing that the universe is scary. The universe doesn't care about us. It's cold and unfeeling. That may seem scary too, but recognizing that means that we have to make our own meaning. We have to make our own environment that's safe. So thinking about scary things is scary, but we shouldn't shy away from it. We should be willing to recognize that there's good and bad, and that there's scary things in the world. But if we put our heads in the sand, that's as bad as anything else.
Okay, Mr. Krauss, can you clarify more the idea of universe from nothing?
Well, it's hard to do in the short time we have, but I wrote a book about it, of course. But the amazing
Yeah.
thing is, for many people, one of the basis of their religious beliefs, if you wish, is that it seems impossible that a universe with 100 billion galaxies, each containing 100 billion stars, could come into existence on its own, potentially from nothing. It even appears to violate the laws of physics. After all, how can something come from nothing? And what I showed in my book is, in fact, that's not true. That, in fact, it's possible, given the laws of physics as we understand them, or at least as we can extrapolate them, based on plausible physics, it's plausible that a universe with 100 billion stars each containing 100 billion, 100 billion galaxies, each containing 100 billion stars, could come into existence from absolutely nothing, given the laws of physics, without a supernatural intelligence. And moreover, we can't prove that, but we could ask, what would be the characteristics that we would expect of a universe that was created from nothing just by plausibly extending the known laws of physics? What would be the characteristics of a 14 billion year old universe that came into existence that way? And the characteristics of that universe would be precisely the characteristics of the universe in which we live. Now, that doesn't prove that our universe came from nothing, but it's highly suggestive. And to me, that's wonderful, because it means that we might ultimately understand the biggest mystery of our own existence without inventing fairy tales.
Mr. Krauss, I guess you are writing a book right now.
Yes, I just finished a new book. It's called The
Wow.
Physics. It's
Some
coming out in January.
Okay. So
In French, and by the way, it's going to be in French for those people in Morocco who speak
okay.
French, because I
Okay.
speak French too. But I know that people in Morocco speak French, many of them, as well as Arabic, and I don't speak Arabic. Maybe it'll come out in Arabic. It's called The Physics of Climate Change, which is a problem that's facing all of us human beings, independent of our religion and our nationality and our gender. We're all in this together on this small planet Earth with this fragile atmosphere. And in order to know how to deal with it, instead of dealing with emotions and political arguments, which I don't want to talk about, I wanted to talk about the science of it. So every person, whether they're skeptical or not, can understand whether they think it's a problem, and that will help us as a species to decide how to deal with it. So this book is a brief book that's meant for anyone to understand what the scientific basis of climate change is and what the predictions are and whether you should believe them or not.
Yeah, I'm sure that it's going to be an extraordinary book.
Well, I hope so. I
Inshallah.
hope you think so. If people have read
Yeah.
it like it, so I hope that you enjoy it when you read it.
Yeah, I'm going to read it in Arabic or English because my French is not that good.
Okay, well, right now it's definitely coming out in English. I don't have any contract
Okay.
for an Arabic, but I'd be happy to talk to an Arabic publisher to have it come out in Arabic if anyone wants to
Mm,
contact me.
yeah, that will be great. Mr. Krauss, can you tell us an advice, a final advice to the believer and an advice to the non-believer?
The advice is keep an open mind and ask questions about yourself and others, and be willing to treat others with respect and explore the ideas that they may have, and be willing to be wrong, to be willing to agree, understand that you might be wrong, and the only way to find out is to question your ideas, explore the world around you with an open mind, and be willing to go wherever nature takes you. That's my advice.
Thank you, Mr. Krauss. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Krauss is a busy man, so this is the end of our discussion for today. Mr. Krauss, thank you so much for this lovely discussion, lovely dialogue. I was so stressed, but thanks to you, I'm like, wow, he's so
Oh,
humble, he's so
well,
nice. So
well,
thank you so much, Mr.
well,
Krause.
well, thank you.
And
It was a delight to talk to you,
thanks.
and you're charming, and it's also what you're doing is important. So I'm happy to be a part of it, and I'm sorry that I don't have more time, but I certainly
No,
enjoyed the discussion that we had.
I hope you liked my accent.
Of course, I love it. It's great. Your accent is
Thanks.
great, and as I say, I wish I could converse with you in Arabic as well as you can converse with me in English.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Mr. Krause. And ladies and gentlemen, goodbye. Thanks, Mr. Krause.